Dear students, in this module, we are studying background to population theories. This module discusses about the evolution of population studies as a discipline, various concepts about the population theories and its background. The major learning objectives in this module are evolution of demographic studies, study of mortality, causes of mortality transition before 20th century, study of fertility, fertility transition, causes of fertility transition before 20th century, study of migration, and population size and growth. Emergence of demographic studies as a discipline. All cultures revere fertility, and hence the birth of a child is an occasion for celebration. The reason is that communities want to grow and expand. On the other hand, deaths are viewed as diminishment and therefore must be mourned. In addition to organic growth of a population, migration also has a significant effect on population size. Sometimes migration is also seen as an adjustment to overpopulation or underpopulation, but often people migrate for better quality of life and escape from epidemics, conflicts, and political instability. Furthermore, according to Naum, understanding and explaining population phenomena is what demography is all about. Demography has developed as a discipline, and all developmental policies are checked out in tune with dynamics of demography. This does not mean that people are fully aware of the facts and their consequences. According to the classic and widely accepted statement by Husserl and Duncan, demography is defined as the study of the size, territorial distribution, and components of population, the changes therein, and components of such changes. Caldwell too concluded that no other social science discipline than demography had turned so far forward third world countries, although most demographic concepts, theories, and methods originate from Europe and North America. Systematic studies of population with respect to its size, density, and distribution, and of important indicators like birth, deaths, migration, and marriages began in the 17th century. John Grant, who is called as the father of demography, was the first person to attempt a systematic study of population. Along with William Petty, Grant developed statistical and census methods of population analysis. Later, these methods became the framework of demographic analysis. Now we will discuss the important issues related to mortality. John Grant is credited to be the first actuarial scientist who constructed a life table by estimating the probability of survival at each age. He is also considered to be among the earliest experts in the study of epidemiology. From his studies, he estimated male-female ratios at birth, death, and birth rates in London and in rural communities. His most noteworthy contribution is the construction of the first mortality table, wherein Grant was able to estimate the number of men of military age, the number of women of childbearing age, the total number of families, and even the population of London by analyzing birth and death rates. Grant asserted that death is a unique and universal event and as a final event. Since then, rigorous analysis of mortality data has gained the importance for public health policies and actions to control disease and minimize deaths, and for insurance companies. Fertility data was found to be useful estimating population size and distribution. John Peter was another pioneering demographer who credited with starting demographic analysis in Germany. In his work, The Divine Order, John Peter analyzed population data of 1056 parishes in Brandenburg and various cities and provinces of Prussia. He constructed several mortality tables and most notably the first table for the whole population of Prussia in 1765. Furthermore, growing attention to public health and the expansion of insurance business resulted in increased awareness of the importance of mortality studies in Europe in 18th century. Registration of important life events like births, deaths and marriages were done in public offices, supplanting church registries in the 19th century. Again, in 19th century, methods for conducting population census were developed. Demographic studies continued to focus on mortality until it was observed that there was a considerable decline in fertility. Then, fertility studies began gaining in importance. It was found that fertility had declined considerably in the industrialized countries during the second half of the 19th century. In order to provide a basis for discussing future rates of population growth, many of the pioneers of demography, such as Grant, Petty and King, actively speculated on past trends. Malthus, in turn, drew on selective historical material from England to sustain the view that the preventive check operated with considerable force throughout all the classes of the community, with evidence for the existence of checks to population growth drawn from modern post-pastoral nations, the Greeks and Romans, and other historic populations. Now we will discuss about mortality transition. Mortality is the second major variable that shapes population trends. The history of mortality in Europe can be divided into three broad phases. The first phase is called as the age of fatal epidemic diseases. Epidemics, especially of bubonic plague and famines in Europe before 1750 to 1800, resulted in such high mortality that they checked population growth. Besides epidemics, wars and political disturbances also led to high mortality. However, not all countries experienced these kind of crises. A population's age structure is an important and it influences the death rate. The death rate is very important to know the causes and consequences. In developing countries, the death rates are highest among infants, young children and the elderly due to poor health conditions, famines and natural disasters. In developed countries, the mortality rate is very low due to availability of good medical services. The earliest period was dominated by infections and parasitic diseases like smallpox, measles, scarlet fever, diphtheria, cholera, malaria, typhoid fever, typhus, whooping cough, tuberculosis, pneumonia and such general conditions as bronchitis, gastritis and enteritis. As these diseases came under control through better treatment methods and public hygiene, the cause of death then progressively shifted to the so-called degenerative diseases such as cancer, heart diseases, cerebrovascular diseases like strokes and diabetes. The causes of the mortality transition are complex and occur over a longer time, the factors affecting fertility decline. Prior to the middle of the 19th century, some changes did take place that improved the chances of human survival. The bubonic plague ceased to be a serious epidemic threat after the last major outbreak in southern France in the years of 1720 to 1722. Now we will have a look at the causes of mortality transition before 20th century. The causes of mortality transition are as followed and are majorly found in Europe, North America, Australia and New Zealand. Some of these causes are improved agricultural practices that led to increased food production and better nutrition. As observed, in the agricultural revolution in England, these included better fertilizers, crop rotation, and winter crops. Industrialization and the development of the factory system meant a greater variety of manufactured goods. Factory production of machinery such as the iron plough, steam engine also contributed to improved agriculture and transport systems. Improved transport made the distribution of food and other goods much easier. Because of the railways, food supplies could be sent rapidly from rural to urban areas, especially in Europe. The economic value of child labor decreased because of social reforms, laws which regulated child labor in factories. Other causes of mortality transition were the greater control of temperature and humidity in the home and at work that contributed to the decline of some diseases. Public sanitation, including improved water supply and sewage disposal and water purification methods like filters, eliminated cholera and typhoid from the waterborne diseases. Improved personal hygiene because of easily available cotton clothing and soap also reduced mortality. Interventions like immunization against smallpox and pasteurization against waterborne diseases also helped in reducing mortality. People became more resistant to some diseases such as scarlet fever. Now we will focus on studying fertility. Data on fertility trends in Europe are available from the 18th century onwards. However, there are estimates from earlier periods also. Fertility data for non-European population are rare and inadequate. The observed fertility levels, trends and differentials have shown wide variation among European populations, even in the absence of widespread deliberate regulation of fertility. These differentials are because of some social determinants of fertility behavior, such as marriage patterns. Fertility may be declined as actual reproductive performance of a woman or an age group of women, as mentioned by Thompson and Lewis. Davis and Blake identified a set of elevation proximate determinants which they called as intermediate fertility variables. In the 18th century, a dramatic decline in fertility was observed in France and Hungary, followed by other more developed societies of Europe and North America. In the 2 centuries that followed, fertility has declined by about 50% in nearly these countries. In developing economies, improvements in child survival are a fundamental driver of fertility decline, which follows from the realization that fewer births are needed to reach target family size. Desired fertility also shrinks with educational progress and income growth. Lower fertility, in turn, promotes improvements in child survival, both through better maternal health and also by allowing more family resources to be devoted to each child. Now we will focus on studying fertility transition. Systematic studies of fertility levels and trends were attempted only in the late 19th and early 20th century by various demographers. Before the historical fertility transition in most of Europe and North America, between the late 18th and early 20th centuries, married women would expect 8 or more births, but today many women do not have children at all. It was observed that the fertility decline began in the 18th of 19th century and accelerated in the second half of the 19th century. The 2 world wars brought about a dramatic but temporary reduction in fertility, which was followed by a baby boom in immediately after World War II. Fertility theories can be used on at least 3 distinct time scales, and which scale is chosen can influence the nature and success of the theory as mentioned by Mason in 1992. They have recently argued that the field of demography's single-minded focus on fertility transitions has created a theoretical blind alley that leaves us incapable of understanding not only fertility transitions but also other fertility variations and change. The fertility transition is linked with fertility decline and also influence the wealth flows and impacts the change that may be triggered by either economic or cultural forces. Now we will discuss causes of fertility transition before the 20th century. Fertility decline because of mortality decline, especially infant and child mortality, which meant that more children survived to grow into adults. It is documented that the decline fertility is a strong association with decreased levels of inequality and increased levels of social mobility. It analyzes and finds strong support for the role of changes in inequality and the environment for social mobility as central factors in our understanding of Europe's fertility transition. Fertility fell with economic development as well. With schooling made universal, females began attending schools in growing numbers. Employment opportunities increased because of industrialization, especially for women. More females were employed outside home, which made child rearing difficult. Women became economically independent and also educated, and thus had greater say in when to have children and how many. Marriage pattern also changed because of increased education level of women. Women married later and the number of divorces also increased. The duration of unions shortened, restricting the number of children. Female celibacy also increased. Now we will focus on studying migration. Migration has been a common phenomena since the hunting and gathering eras. Migration was necessary for survival. The invention of tools, with use of clothes and development of language and social order, meant that humans could migrate over larger distances. However, some of the historical migration streams have also been characterized by violence, destruction, bondage, mass mortality, and genocide. In other words, migration was caused by human suffering of profound magnitudes. Migration directly affects the age structure of both sending and receiving countries because most international migrants are of working age. Approximately 74% of international migrants are in the age group of 20 to 64 years cohort, well above the share in that same cohort in the global population as mentioned by United Nations in 2013. Migration can be of various types. The major ones are political migration, labor migration, slave migration, marriage migration, and others. The study of migration assumed importance only in the 19th century when it was seen to have significant impact on population size and growth, an outcome of colonization and labor needs. We will now discuss about population size and growth. An awareness of mortality and fertility is necessary to understand the need for developing population theories. This awareness grew in the beginning of the 19th century with the realization that fertility transition was one of the factors that drove rapid and sustained growth in Europe. Population size is a major concern not just to meet the need for an army to defend the nation, but also for survival, reproduction, and replacement of the population. A population decline to below replacement level is a major concern to one and all. In a situation of high mortality and low fertility, large or small population groups or family groups or country's population itself may get extinct over the period of time. During demographic transition, along with the growth in number, there are changes in the population age structure as well. It is universally understood that when the population size and growth changes, definitely there will be change in the quality of life of the population. There is sufficient documentation to show that population in early 17th century had high mortality because of famines, life-threatening non-communicable diseases like cancer, heart attacks, and communicable diseases like cholera, smallpox, sexually transmitted infections, and from diseases caused by poor sanitation and personal hygiene, contaminated water and air, and coming in contact with animals. The demographic theories focus on these issues of fertility, mortality, and migration and help the policymakers, administrators, and political leaders to work on these issues for well-being of the societies. The declining population growth and the aging population causes concern and overburdens welfare schemes, whereas the demographic theories help and give possible solutions to address the problems. The demographic theories, interdependent and overlapped by fertility, mortality, life expectancy, and migration, explain past and future trends at the global level and how they are changing the population centers of the world. The scientific revolution of the 17th century was adopted many technological aspects to monitor the population growth, and therefore demographers have been involved since then in comparing past and present populations, particularly in relation to size and characteristics of population change. In conclusion, we can say that the field of demography emphasized on the study of components of population, variation, and its change. The demography is intertwined and depends on the fertility, mortality, and migration. The study of the causes of consequences of socio-economic development reveals by thorough and changes in the demography. In demography studies, the migration plays a vital role and it can be differentiated as seasonal, temporary, or permanent as the human beings migrate from one place to another in search of employment, health, and for better living conditions. Fertility is linked with the development. In the fertility rate decreases, the development happens. In many developed countries, the fertility rate is increased flatly and mortality also reduced due to advancement of health services. Thank you.